Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the final turbulent decades of India's fight for independence. This was a time of immense hope, incredible sacrifice, and decisions that would literally reshape a subcontinent.
So, let me ask you, how do you defeat an empire? By the early 20th century, pretty much everyone in India wanted freedom. No question there. But how to get it? Well, that was a whole other story. The entire struggle really boiled down to two powerful and totally opposite ideas.
So which path do you choose? Do you inspire millions of people to just peacefully refuse to cooperate, to bring the whole system grinding to a halt with nothing but moral force? Or do you decide that freedom can only be won on the battlefield, by taking up arms and fighting fire with fire?
All right, first up, let's explore the path of nonviolent resistance. This was a revolutionary strategy, and you can't talk about it without talking about its champion, one of history's most iconic figures, Mahatma Gandhi. He believed the strongest weapon wasn't a gun, it was the will of the people.
Okay, so here's the trigger. After supporting Britain in World War I, Indians were expecting a move towards self-governance. But instead, they got the Rowlatt Act, and it just felt like a total betrayal, a law that let the government imprison anyone without a trial, basically stripping away fundamental rights.
The response was, as you can imagine, immediate. People gathered to protest, but the British government answered with just brutal force. The most horrifying example happened at Jallianwala Bagh, where troops were ordered to fire on an unarmed crowd that was trapped in a walled garden with literally no way to escape. It was a shocking and tragic massacre of civilians.
In the face of this violence, Gandhi came up with a radical idea. He argued that British rule was only possible because Indians themselves cooperated with it. So he launched the non-cooperation movement, calling on the entire nation to simply stop helping the foreign government. It was this massive, nationwide campaign of peaceful civil disobedience.
And the impact of this was profound. It wasn't just a protest, it was a psychological transformation for the whole country. It gave people new confidence, it brought Hindus and Muslims together, and it completely shattered the myth that the British were ruling India for its own good.
But, and this is a big but, this strategy had a critical vulnerability. In the village of Chauri Chaura, a protest turned violent and an angry mob killed 22 policemen. Now for Gandhi, a devout believer in ahimsa, or total nonviolence, this was just unacceptable. He was horrified and he called off the entire national movement. And that right there shows you the core challenge. It required a level of unified, peaceful discipline from millions of people that was almost impossible to guarantee. So, with Gandhi's movement paused, that debate over strategy just intensified. Another powerful leader, Subhas Chandra Bose, argued that nonviolence had its limits. He believed true freedom had to be won in a fight, and he pushed for a completely different path.
For Bose, an armed revolution wasn't just an option, it was a necessity. So he traveled abroad and, primarily using Indian prisoners of war captured by the Japanese in East Asia, he organized the Indian National Army, or INA, with the goal of waging a military campaign against the British.
And this quote, wow, it captures the difference in philosophy perfectly. There was no ambiguity in Bose's message. It was direct, powerful, and a complete contrast to Gandhi's principle of nonviolence. It was a call for sacrifice on the battlefield, plain and simple.
The INA's plan was clear: fight a conventional war. Since it was impossible to raise an army like that inside British-controlled India, Bose organized it on foreign soil. He even set up a provisional government of Free India in Singapore. But this strategy came with a huge risk. It relied on getting support from the Axis powers during World War II, a gamble that tied India's fate to the outcome of a massive global conflict.
Okay, so now we reach the endgame. After the immense strain of World War II, Britain was just weakened, economically, militarily. It just couldn't hold on to its vast empire anymore. The situation in India became explosive, and independence was no longer a question of if, but how.
British officials made one last attempt to keep the country together. The cabinet mission proposed this really complex federal structure for a united India. But the disagreements, especially the Muslim League's demand for a separate nation, were just too deep, and it failed. This led to a final, drastic alternative put forth by the last viceroy, Lord Mountbatten. His plan accepted that partition was now, inevitable.
The Mountbatten Plan was quickly passed into law as the Indian Independence Act. It laid out the exact steps. First, 2 new dominions, basically self-governing countries, India and Pakistan, would be created. Second, the huge provinces of Bengal and Punjab would be divided. Third, all British authority over India would officially end. And fourth, hundreds of princely states were now independent and had to choose which dominion to join.
So on August 15, 1947, after decades of struggle by millions, the moment finally arrived. It was this moment of incredible, long-awaited triumph, but it was mixed with an almost unimaginable tragedy.
As the clock ticked towards midnight on the eve of independence, India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, stood before the Constituent Assembly to address the new nation. And his speech, well, it perfectly captured the profound, historic significance of that moment.
His words are now legendary. That famous line marked the definitive end of nearly 2 centuries of British rule and announced the birth of a new, sovereign, and independent India. It was truly the promise of a new dawn.
But that new dawn was so bittersweet. The very act of Parliament that granted freedom also carved a line right through the country. It divided British India, creating 2 nations where there had been one, and in the process, it displaced millions of people in one of the largest and most violent migrations in human history.
And so we're left with this question. The struggle for India's soul, fought through the moral force of nonviolence and the call to armed conflict, ultimately did achieve its goal, but it left behind this divided legacy of freedom and trauma, leaving us all to wonder, was this the only way it could have ended?